This swing
Imagine a
set is a
quiet
clear
suburban
violation of our
neighborhood where
community's
every
bylaws.
lawn is
Section
perfectly
3,
trimmed, every
subsection
fence
B.
painted just right,
You can't be
and every
serious.
family follows the rules, until a simple swing set threatens to destroy it all. When the Martins built a swing set for their children, they never imagined it would spark a full-blown battle with their HOA. Threats, fines, and ultimatums arrive, but what happens next will shock you, because an entire neighborhood decides to stand up for the laughter of children, no matter the cost. This is the story of joy, defiance, and a community uniting against authority. The swing set of joy in the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, the streets curved in neat patterns, lined with trimmed hedges and manicured lawns that looked almost identical. Every driveway held a polished car, every porch light was in place, and every front yard seemed designed to meet the silent expectations of the homeowners association. Beneath the calm surface, however, the rules of the HOA often weighed heavily on families who only wanted a little freedom to live their lives. Among these families was the Martins. A young couple with 2 children, they had recently moved into Willow Creek with hopes of giving their kids the kind of childhood filled with laughter, play, and the warmth of a close-knit neighborhood. The Martins' children, Lily and Ethan, had only one request that summer: a swing set in the backyard. Not a massive playground, not anything extraordinary, just a simple swing set that would let them soar into the sky, chase the wind, and create memories. The day the swing set was built, the neighborhood felt different. It stood proudly in the Martins' backyard, painted a cheerful shade of blue, with 2 swings and a small slide. For Lily and Ethan, it was nothing less than a castle of joy. Every afternoon, their laughter rang through the air as they swung, higher and higher, calling out to each other in excitement. Their joy spilled beyond their backyard fence, reaching the ears and hearts of nearby families. Children who rarely ventured outdoors found themselves drawn to the Martins' home. Before long, what started as 2 kids playing turned into a gathering of neighborhood children who shared the joy of the swing set. For parents watching from nearby patios, it was a welcome change. The sound of children's laughter replaced the usual silence of neatly maintained yards. The Martins' swing set became more than a structure. It became a symbol of life, innocence, and the kind of happiness that rules and regulations could never capture. But in neighborhoods governed by strict associations, joy often attracted attention, and not always the good kind. Hidden behind her blinds, Mrs. Whitmore, one of the most vocal HOA board members, watched with a growing frown. To her, the swing set was not a harmless addition, but an intrusion on the uniformity of Willow Creek. The children's laughter, while endearing to some, grated against her belief that order and rules defined the community. It didn't take long before whispers began. At first, they were subtle. A comment here, a raised eyebrow there. "Does that swing set even meet the HOA guidelines?" someone murmured during a casual stroll. Another resident, eager to avoid trouble, mentioned that the color was too bright, too distracting against the neutral tones of the neighborhood. The whispers grew into murmurs, and soon into concerns raised at the monthly HOA meeting. The Martins had no idea their joy was under threat. To them, life felt perfect. They saw their children playing freely, neighbors' children joining in, and families connecting in ways they hadn't imagined when they first moved in. But behind the scenes, paperwork was being drafted, complaints were being recorded, and an agenda was forming. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold, a letter arrived in the Martins' mailbox. Neatly folded, stamped with the official seal of the Willow Creek HOA, the letter was the first shadow to fall over their happiness. It declared that the swing set violated community rules. It claimed the structure disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood and posed potential liability concerns. The Martins were given 30 days to remove it or face escalating fines. Shock rippled through the family. The swing set, which had brought nothing but joy, was now branded as a problem. Lily and Ethan could not understand why something so simple, something so pure, was suddenly forbidden. Their parents felt anger, confusion, and a rising sense of injustice. They had followed the rules in good faith, believing that their modest addition was harmless. Now they realized that the HOA's grip on the neighborhood was far stronger than they had imagined, but something else began to stir alongside their despair. Neighbors who had watched their children play at the swing set were outraged. Families who rarely spoke to one another now found a common cause. Parents whispered late at night about the absurdity of the HOA's demands, about how joy could be policed in such a cold, bureaucratic way. The Martins' struggle was becoming the community's struggle. The letter marked the end of peace for the Martins, but it also lit the spark of something greater. The HOA had drawn its line in the sand. The Martins, and perhaps the entire neighborhood, would soon decide whether to obey or to resist. As the 30-day countdown began, tension seeped into the air of Willow Creek. Each swing Lily and Ethan took carried not just laughter, but also the weight of uncertainty. Would their castle of joy stand, or would it be torn down by rules that valued order over happiness? First chapter of this battle had begun, and it was only a matter of time before the conflict erupted into something much larger than a swing set. Whispers of resistance. The Martins tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, but the letter from the HOA felt like a storm cloud hanging over their home. Each day when Lily and Ethan climbed onto the swing set, their parents watched with bittersweet smiles, knowing the days might be numbered. The countdown had begun, and every tick of the clock echoed louder than the laughter of their children. What the Martins didn't know was that their struggle was quietly stirring something in the community. Neighbors who had once lived in silence, following the HOA's rules without question, began to murmur. Some spoke of the unfairness, others of how life had finally returned to Willow Creek since the swing set appeared. A neighborhood once defined by its perfectly mowed lawns was now bound together by something far more powerful: children's joy. At first, the resistance was small. A handwritten note slipped under the Martins' door, reading, "We support. You. Don't give up." Another family left a plate of cookies on their porch with a card that said, "The kids need this." Little gestures, but powerful enough to give the Martins hope that they weren't alone. Soon, families began gathering quietly in living rooms after sunset, curtains drawn to avoid prying eyes. They shared stories of their own frustrations with the HOA. Some had been told to repaint fences because the shade of white wasn't neutral enough. Others had been fined for leaving bicycles in driveways. These rules, designed to preserve order, had instead stripped away individuality and joy. The swing set became more than a structure. It became a symbol. Neighbors who rarely spoke to each other were now united by a common cause: protecting the Martins and the happiness of their children. But unity came with risk. Everyone knew the HOA wasn't kind to dissent. Mrs. Whitmore, the board member who spearheaded the complaint, had built a reputation for being unyielding. She was known for walking the streets with a clipboard, documenting every crack in the sidewalk, every flower planted outside of approved guidelines. If she caught wind of the secret meetings, the HOA's wrath could spread far beyond the Martins. Despite the fear, the meetings grew larger. Parents, grandparents, and even young couples without children joined the cause. The Martins listened in awe as neighbors who had once waved politely from a distance now spoke with passion and determination. The swing set was no longer just for Lily and Ethan. It was for every child in Willow Creek who deserved the freedom to play. Meanwhile, the HOA pushed forward. Another letter arrived at the Martins' home, colder and more threatening than the first. It reminded them of the 30-day deadline, warned of daily fines, and hinted at legal action if they refused. The Martins felt the walls closing in, but the neighborhood's growing support gave them courage. The turning point came one Saturday afternoon. Dozens of children gathered in the Martins' backyard, their laughter filling the air like a song of defiance. Parents watched from lawn chairs, their faces set with quiet determination. It wasn't a protest, at least not yet. It was simply a community choosing joy over fear. But for Mrs. Whitmore, who stood across the street with her arms folded, it was a challenge to her authority. Her glare promised that this battle was far from over. That night, another meeting was held, this time in the Martins' garage. The neighbors knew they could no longer stay in the shadows. If the HOA wanted a fight, the community was ready. Plans began to form, not just to defend the swing set, but to confront the very power of the HOA itself. For years, Willow Creek had lived under the HOA's rules without question. But the Martins' swing set had awakened something no rule book could suppress: a collective voice. What started as whispers of resistance was about to grow into something far louder, something impossible to ignore. The countdown continued, but now the Martins were no longer standing alone. An entire neighborhood was beginning to rise with them. And the HOA was about to face a challenge unlike any it had ever seen. And so, as the 30 days slipped away, the stage was set for a confrontation that would test the very soul of Willow Creek. The HOA strikes back. The days passed with an uneasy rhythm in Willow Creek. The laughter of children playing on the Martins' swing set rang louder than ever, but beneath that sound was a quiet hum of tension. Every parent who watched their kids swing higher and higher wondered how long it could last. Every neighbor who smiled at the sight of joy in the Martins' backyard knew a storm was coming. The 30-day deadline was shrinking fast, and the HOA was preparing to make its move. For Mrs. Whitmore and the HOA board, the swing set was not just a violation of the rules. It was a challenge to their authority. For years, they had ruled the neighborhood with an iron grip, hiding behind the language of community standards and uniformity. To them, the Martins' defiance was dangerous. For if one family could stand against the rules, others might follow. And so, the board gathered in their meeting hall, whispering behind closed doors, crafting a strategy not just to remove the swing set, but to make an example of the Martins. Letters escalated into warnings. Warnings escalated into threats. The HOA announced that fines of $50 per day would begin immediately if the swing set was not dismantled. Rumors spread that the HOA might place a lien on the Martins' property, jeopardizing their home itself. The Martins felt their world closing in, but each time they looked outside and saw neighbors standing beside them, their fear softened into determination. Still, the pressure was immense. The Martins began receiving anonymous notes in their mailbox, some encouraging, others harsh. "Stand strong," one read. But another scrawled in angry handwriting declared, "Rules are rules. Take it down or move out." The neighborhood was no longer just a battleground of ideas. It was fracturing under the weight of conflict. Then came the day of the inspection. Mrs. Whitmore arrived with 2 HOA board members, clipboards in hand, their faces stiff with authority. They paced the Martins' yard, snapping photos of the swing set, measuring distances from fences, and jotting notes in silence. The Martins stood by helplessly, watching strangers dissect their children's playground as though it were a crime scene. Ethan and Lily watched from the porch, their small faces full of confusion, unable to understand why their castle of joy was being treated like a threat. The following week, the HOA held an emergency meeting, one that quickly turned into a battlefield. Dozens of residents crowded into the hall, some siding with the Martins, others afraid of the consequences of defying the rules. The board sat at the front like judges, their voices cold and formal as they declared the swing set an unauthorized structure that must be removed. But the Martins weren't alone anymore. Neighbors stood and spoke, their voices shaking but firm. They argued that the swing set brought life back to the neighborhood, that it was harmless, that the rules themselves were outdated and cruel. Parents spoke of the importance of childhood, play, of how a simple swing had united families who had never spoken before. Their words filled the hall with emotion, and for the first time in years, the board was forced to listen to more than its own authority. Mrs. Whitmore, however, remained unmoved. She leaned into the microphone and reminded everyone that rules existed for a reason, that without order there would be chaos, and that the HOA would not allow Willow Creek to fall into disorder. Her words were met with scattered applause from a few loyal supporters, but also with boos and murmurs from a growing crowd of dissenters. The community was no longer afraid to speak. Still, the board voted, and as expected, they ruled against the Martins. The swing set was to be removed within 10 days. If not, the HOA would pursue legal action. The gavel came down like a hammer, and the Martins' fate seemed sealed. But something had changed in that meeting hall. For years, residents of Willow Creek had bowed their heads and obeyed even when the rules hurt them. That night, many walked away with fire in their hearts. The HOA had struck back, but in doing so, it had awakened a rebellion. In the days that followed, the Martins' yard became more than a backyard. It became a gathering place. Neighbors came not just to talk, but to act. Some offered money to help, with legal fees. Others promised to spread the story beyond Willow Creek, to newspapers and social media. Children continued to play on the swing set, their laughter now a form of protest. Every push, every giggle, every flight into the sky was an act of resistance. The HOA had struck back with rules, fines, and threats, but the neighborhood was answering with unity, with courage, and with a determination stronger than any regulation. The stage was set for something bigger than a swing set, bigger even than the Martins. It was now a fight for freedom itself, for the right to live, to play, to breathe, without fear of a rulebook dictating every corner of life. And as the deadline loomed, both sides braced themselves for the confrontation that would define Willow Creek forever. The community rises, the Martins awoke to the hum of activity outside their home. Even before the sun had fully risen, neighbors were gathering in the driveway, carrying supplies, folding chairs, and banners they had hastily created the night before. Word had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Willow Creek was no longer a place where rules could silence joy. The swing set had become a beacon, and the Martins' backyard had transformed into the front line of a growing movement. Parents worked quickly, coordinating tasks with efficiency that surprised even themselves. Some set up tables with water and snacks for the children who would play on the swing set, while others drafted letters and petitions to submit to the HOA and local newspapers. The sense of urgency was palpable. Every moment that passed without action was a moment closer to the swing set's removal, yet each passing hour also strengthened the neighborhood's resolve. Children arrived early, as if sensing the importance of the day. Lily and Ethan led the way, swinging higher than ever, their laughter echoing like a call to arms. Soon the yard was filled with the sounds of joy, a striking contrast to the tension in the adults' conversations. Parents watched with a mixture of pride and anxiety, realizing that the children's happiness had become the catalyst for a movement that no rule or regulation could contain. The Martins themselves felt a surge of emotion. Where once they had been fearful and uncertain, now they found strength in the solidarity of their neighbors. Mr. Martin looked around at the crowd, seeing familiar faces. Some he had barely spoken to in months, others he knew intimately. Each one united by a shared belief that the HOA had overstepped its bounds. Mrs. Martin took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the struggle, yet also a sense of hope she hadn't felt since moving to Willow Creek. Meanwhile, the HOA, unaware of the scale of the mobilization, continued with its bureaucratic approach. Notices were sent, reminders of fines were issued, and legal threats loomed like dark clouds over the Martins' home. But the neighborhood was no longer intimidated. In fact, the more the HOA pushed, the more the residents rallied together. Meetings became planning sessions for peaceful demonstrations, outreach to local media, and petitions to city officials who could mediate in the dispute. Communication spread beyond Willow Creek's boundaries. Social media posts of children playing on the swing set went viral within local community groups. Photos showed families gathering, united, their smiles defying the cold authority of the HOA. Comments poured in from people in neighboring towns, praising the Martins and their community for standing up to an organization that seemed determined to suppress happiness. The story became a symbol, proof that ordinary people could challenge rules that no longer served the people they governed. Back in Willow Creek, the residents held their first official neighborhood meeting under the shade of a large oak tree. Near the Martins' home, flyers were posted, schedules drafted, and volunteers assigned roles. Some coordinated with local journalists, ensuring that cameras could capture the children at play. Others contacted lawyers for advice on how to handle the HOA's threats. The planning was meticulous, but it carried an undercurrent of excitement. For the first time, the residents were not acting out of fear. They were acting out of purpose. As the community organized, the children remained unaware of the legal and political battles unfolding around them. To them, it was simply a day to play. But their innocence became a powerful tool. Each laugh, each shout, each swing of the rope seemed to defy the HOA's authority, sending a message that the joy of childhood could not be legislated away. Parents watched the scene with awe, understanding that their unity was not just symbolic, it was practical. The sight of dozens of children playing freely made it nearly impossible for the HOA to act without causing public outrage. Tensions escalated when Mrs. Whitmore appeared unexpectedly, clipboard in hand, surveying the Martins' yard with a critical eye. But instead of fear, she encountered resistance. Neighbors politely but firmly explained that the community had gathered to protect the children's rights to play. Cameras from local media crews captured the scene, broadcasting the confrontation to a wider audience. Mrs. Whitmore's authority seemed diminished in the face of solidarity, and for the first time, the HOA's power appeared vulnerable. The day ended with the neighborhood united around the Martins' swing set, planning for the days ahead. Everyone knew that legal challenges and further conflicts with the HOA were inevitable, yet the sense of purpose was invigorating. The swing set had become more than just a playground. It was a rallying point, a symbol of resistance, and a testament to what a community could achieve when it stood together. As dusk settled over Willow Creek, the children's laughter echoed long into the evening, a triumphant song against the cold rules of bureaucracy. The Martins looked on, tears in their eyes, realizing that their battle was no longer just about a swing set. It was about something far greater, reclaiming the right to joy, community, and freedom in a neighborhood that had forgotten the importance of both. And as night fell, the Martins and their neighbors understood that the fight was far from over. The HOA would not relent quietly, and the coming days would demand courage, creativity, and unwavering unity. Yet in that moment, under the fading light of the sun, Willow Creek had discovered its strength. The final confrontation, the countdown had nearly run its course. 10 days remained before the HOA's final deadline, and Willow Creek had transformed into a neighborhood bracing for confrontation. The Martins' backyard, once a quiet place of play, had become a hub of activity, where planning sessions and strategy meetings took place as frequently as children swung back and forth on their beloved swing set. Legal counsel had been consulted, petitions signed, and social media campaigns launched. The story of the threatened swing set had spread beyond Willow Creek, gaining attention from local news outlets. Reporters visited the neighborhood to capture footage of children playing, parents rallying, and neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder. What had begun as a private family struggle had now become a public issue, with the HOA's reputation hanging in the balance. Despite the preparations, tension ran high. Every knock at the door, every passing car, every rustle in the bushes set, hearts racing. The Martins family felt both fear and hope, their emotions intertwined in a complex web. They understood the stakes. The swing set represented more than a playground. It represented their right to live freely, to protect their children's happiness, and to stand up to authority when it threatened to suppress basic joy. The HOA, for its part, had doubled down. Mrs. Whitmore and the board sent a final notice, sternly reiterating that the swing set must be removed immediately or fines and legal action would follow. They had underestimated the growing community support, assuming that fear would force compliance. Instead, their threats only solidified the neighborhood's resolve. On the day of the final confrontation, a crowd gathered in the Martins' yard. Neighbors carried banners reading, "Children deserve to play," and "HOA rules cannot silence joy." Local news cameras lined the streets, broadcasting the scene live. The children continued to swing, unaware of the significance of their actions, their laughter resonating like a defiant anthem. Mrs. Whitmore arrived with 2 HOA enforcers, clipboards and cameras in hand. She expected compliance, but instead found a neighborhood united. The residents formed a human barrier around the swing set, standing firm yet peaceful, their determination evident in their posture and expressions. It was a silent but powerful message. The community would not be intimidated. Negotiations began, but the balance of power had shifted. The Martins' neighbors spoke with authority, detailing the widespread support, the media attention, and the unity of the neighborhood. They argued that the swing set did not violate safety standards and that its removal would be seen as an overreach, damaging the HOA's credibility and morale in the community. Throughout the confrontation, reporters captured every moment. Live footage showed children swinging as adults argued, banners waving in the background, and neighbors speaking with calm but unwavering resolve. The HOA's cold authority began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. Even Mrs. Whitmore appeared unsettled, realizing that her rigid enforcement had ignited a movement far stronger than anticipated. After hours of tense discussion, a compromise was proposed. The swing set would remain, but the Martins agreed to certain aesthetic adjustments, such as repainting it in a neutral tone that blended more harmoniously with the neighborhood. The fines were rescinded, and the HOA agreed to revise their rules to prevent similar conflicts in the future. While it was not an absolute victory, it represented a monumental shift. The community had stood together, and their collective voice had prevailed. The day ended with laughter and cheers echoing across Willow Creek. Neighbors celebrated their unity, knowing that the swing set had become more than just a playground. It had become a symbol of resistance, community strength, and the triumph of joy over rigid authority. The Martins watched their children swing higher than ever, the golden light of the setting sun reflecting on smiling faces. Their hearts swelled with pride and relief. They understood that the battle had been bigger than they had imagined. It had been a fight for community, for freedom, and for the simple right of children to play without fear. In the quiet aftermath, Willow Creek felt different. The streets seemed warmer, the yards more welcoming, and the air carried a sense of possibility. Families had discovered their collective power, neighbors had forged bonds that would last for years, and the swing set remained as a testament to what could be achieved when ordinary people stood together. The confrontation was over, but the legacy of courage and unity would endure, inspiring not just Willow Creek, but countless communities where joy and freedom might one day face similar challenges. A neighborhood transformed. The morning after the final confrontation dawned with a calm that felt almost surreal. Willow Creek had survived its most heated dispute in years, and the Martins' backyard stood as a quiet monument to resilience and unity. The swing set, freshly painted in muted, harmonious colors, remained exactly where it had always been, a symbol not only of childhood joy, but of a neighborhood that had refused to be silenced. Life began to settle back into its familiar rhythm, yet nothing felt quite the same. Parents who had once kept to themselves now waved to one another with genuine warmth. Children who had only known structured, silent streets now ran freely from yard to yard, laughter spilling over fences. The Martins, once isolated by fear of fines and legal action, now found themselves at the center of a community they had unknowingly helped awaken. The HOA, forced to acknowledge the community's power, implemented subtle changes. New rules were drafted with input from residents, emphasizing safety and aesthetics without suppressing individuality or joy. The board, including Mrs. Whitmore, had learned a difficult lesson about the limits of authority and the strength of collective action. Though some tensions remained, the balance of power had shifted. Residents felt empowered to voice concerns without fear, and the neighborhood had become a living example of collaboration over control. Children flocked to the Martins' swing set every afternoon, their laughter now uninterrupted, their play a symbol of triumph. Parents often gathered nearby, sharing coffee, stories, and advice. Some recounted the early days of quiet whispers of resistance, marveling at how far they had come. Others spoke of the lessons learned, that rules were important, yes, but humanity, joy, and community were more important. The Martins themselves reflected on the journey. They had entered Willow Creek seeking a peaceful life, unaware of how fragile happiness could be under the weight of rigid authority. They had faced threats, fines, and the possibility of losing not only their swing set, but the sense of safety and freedom they had hoped to build for their children. And yet, through courage, solidarity, and the support of neighbors, they had emerged stronger, with a family and community more connected than ever before. The transformation extended beyond the Martins' backyard. Neighbors began small projects to reclaim the joy in their own yards, planting gardens, building small play areas, and organizing communal activities. Block parties, which had once been rare and perfunctory, became lively affairs filled with laughter, music, and games. The neighborhood that had once feared the power of a swing set now celebrated it as the spark that ignited a culture of unity and joy. Even the children, oblivious to the politics behind the swing set, sensed the shift. Lily and Ethan played with their friends in an atmosphere of freedom and safety, unaware that their everyday swings were a daily act of victory. Their laughter, echoing through the streets, became a soundtrack for Willow Creek's transformation. It reminded every resident that the simplest pleasures, the ability to play, to connect, to be heard, were worth fighting for. The Martins' story spread beyond the confines of the neighborhood. Local media outlets highlighted the triumph of the community, showcasing a case where ordinary families had stood together against bureaucracy and won. Other neighborhoods took notice, inspired by the lesson that courage, unity, and persistence could protect the rights of families and children. Willow Creek, once a quiet suburb overshadowed by strict rules, became a symbol of resilience and the power of collective action. In quiet moments, Mrs. Martin would watch Lily and Ethan swing, against the backdrop of a golden sunset reflecting on the journey from fear to triumph. She remembered the letter from the HOA, the tension of the meetings, the pressure of deadlines, and the rising support from neighbors who had become more like family than acquaintances. Every push of the swing reminded her that a small act, an act of joy, of innocence, of play, could inspire change far greater than anyone imagined. The neighborhood had changed too. Willow Creek's residents learned that rules were meant to serve, not to suffocate. They understood that a community thrives not through uniformity enforced by fear, but through respect, collaboration, and the shared pursuit of happiness. And At the center of this lesson stood the Martins' swing set, a modest structure that had become a powerful symbol of what can happen when people refuse to accept injustice quietly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across, the neatly trimmed lawns, the Martins' backyard, remained alive with motion. Children laughed, neighbors conversed, and for the first time in years, Willow Creek felt truly alive. The swing set had survived, yes, but more importantly, the community had grown, strengthened, and transformed. The conflict that had begun with fear ended with empowerment. The neighborhood had discovered its voice. The children had reclaimed their play, and the Martins had found their place at the heart of a community willing to protect joy at all costs. Willow Creek would never be the same. Rules could still be written, but the spirit of the people who lived there had been awakened, forever altering the fabric of the neighborhood. And so, as twilight settled over the quiet streets, one simple truth remained. The laughter of children, the unity of neighbors, and the courage to stand together were far more powerful than any rule, any letter, or any threat. Willow Creek had learned to swing freely again, and in doing so, it had discovered what it truly meant to be a community.